Welcome back, everyone. If I haven't met you before, my name is Naomi Sunderland. I work here at Griffith University, and I'm really happy to be chairing and helping to facilitate the next session. We've got an incredible lineup of some amazing researchers, artists, musicians, and together we're going to have a real treat to hear about some really big projects and some emerging projects that are happening around the country. So, yes, everyone welcome in. Please hurry back. And just before we start, just letting people know that Christy Apps has found a set of keys in the toilets. If anyone's lost them, she's handed them to security, so pass that on. But the theme of this session today is social impact of music making in Oceania, with a special session with 2 local Australian Research Council projects on social impact and social equity. And I've had a long engagement with these projects, and it's just so great to see them from the start and see them mature and see them coming to their closing stages as well. So first up, we've got Sandra Gattenhof and Donna Hancox. So Sandra's representing the team, I think, talking about place-based and people-centred social impact frameworks to talk about arts, culture and creativity. So can you please help me welcome Sandra today?
Thank you, Naomi, for that welcome. Yes, unfortunately, Donna Hancox has work across the river at QUT, so I'm representing the team today. I begin by acknowledging the custodians of the land on which we gather today, the Yagara and Turrbal peoples, and thank them for their care for country, culture and community. These unceded lands have always been places of teaching, research and culture. I also acknowledge First Nations people who are in the room today and join us online. Excuse me. The work I'm about to share is not a solo endeavour. This has taken considerable combined effort from my collaborators Donna Hancox, who I said couldn't be here, Helen Claby, Sasha Mackay and Brian Crawford. More than 30 years of focused research in Australia and internationally tells us that most arts and cultural engagement, whether in a school or in societal contexts, results in improvement in self-esteem, connection, well-being, knowledge creation, knowledge extension, cultural maintenance, creative problem solving, imaginative responsiveness, and awareness of self in concert with others. With this project that you can see on the screen, the Regional Arts and Social Impact Project, we worked in communities on Inangai country in central Western Queensland and in Palawa country in Lutchwita, Tasmania. We were searching for a more nuanced story about the impact of arts, culture and creativity for communities, with an explicit focus on understanding outcomes related to value, well-being and social inclusion. Or, to put it into a few pithy words, the research was attempting to respond to Brown and Trimboli's call for impact evaluations that demonstrate alterations in the quality of life. To date, the literature and practice has shown that there is an observable disconnect between the impact of arts, culture and creativity on individuals and communities, what is measured and how the impact is reported. At this moment, particularly, we have a newly minted cultural policy. This means we have an opportunity to develop a new discourse about what arts, culture and creativity contribute, how the contribution can be described, and what opportunities, frameworks and languages exist to assist with the communication of outcomes of arts engagement. For this project, we used what we call a creative placemaking approach. For us, it is a distinctive approach to fostering enduring social change in places via arts, culture and creativity. Creative placemaking offers a unique framework for exploring the contributions of arts and culture to the well-being and social cohesion of diverse communities. This framework significantly disrupts and innovates current understandings of the role arts and culture in communities through the centering of place as the primary element of value. As both a policy and an approach, it presents significant opportunities to make visible the value of arts and culture and their capacity to prioritise community ownership of projects, connect people, maintain a consistent creative presence in the community, and drive social capital. So what did we learn through this project? This research has delivered 4 key frameworks that can be applied to arts, culture and creativity that work for both urban communities, regional communities, remote communities, small organisations, large organisations, and overall help us to understand and articulate impact and value. The first framework is arts, culture, and the addition of the word creativity. Expanding our language from just arts and culture to include the notion of creativity allows for the valuing and representation of culture and cultural practices that are inclusive of ritual, customs, traditions and practices that express people and place, as well as what is valuable and meaningful to those communities. Using the term creativity may break down the perceived barriers of elitism described to the term the arts. The research highlights the need to use the word arts and culture together rather than referring to one entity or another in the singular. For research participants, the word art implied form-based, whereas creativity was seen to be experiential. The second framework is about people-centred models. Our research highlights the need to develop impact assessment models and approaches that are people-centred and have the flexibility to be shaped by end-user defined outcomes. One set of defined markers will not suit all communities, even though the governments try to tell us they do. Even if these population sizes are similar, there are differences in geography, in infrastructure, engagement, in equity of access to arts and culture that need to be considered. Developing people-centred models may ensure that the impact and change is not only articulated through the goals of the funders or delivery organisations, but is understood first by the people participating in the arts and culture and in the community. Arts-based methods are inherently people-centred and supports our belief that data must be generated and gathered in community, able to be analysed and understood by community, and also shared back in the first instance to community. The third framework is the notion of collective wellbeing, which we've heard a lot about over the last 3 days. This is a coordinated and meaningful collaboration between organisations, agencies, authentic engagement with communities, and art-led approaches to creating positive social change. These are keys to wellbeing for both individuals and communities. Wellbeing is expressed through an arts and cultural lens as self-determination, sense-making, belonging, equity, and cohesion. We need to rethink wellbeing and the related concept of social inclusion to address collective and community-wide approaches and interventions rather than historic, individualised approaches and/or medicalised approaches. This collective approach has been informed by our research collaborations with First Nations communities and recognises that wellbeing requires systemic change and whole-of-community approaches. The fourth idea is that around social inclusion. The research found that the dominant form of value in arts and cultural engagement is located in what we call social bonding and bridging, that allows individuals and communities to develop what Brown and Novak call a sense of connectedness, self-understanding and identity creation defined by geography and by its people. Value can be expressed as a diversity of cultural expression and sense of continuity both with the past and a pathway into the future. The research highlights the strong connection between wellbeing and social inclusion, and overall the value in a social inclusion frame shows that arts and cultural engagement is aligned with social interaction and enhanced and improved social behaviours. One of the important outcomes of the regional arts and social impact research is the development of the 4 frames on this slide, and I'm very aware it's small and I apologise for that. The frames should not be viewed as static language or a fixed understanding of a single concept. The frames and associated concepts are suggested as starting points for communities and organisations to begin articulating social outcomes for individuals and whole of community. This positioning supports the finding from this research that creating a generic set of impact assessment markers is not the preferred way in which communities would like to develop qualitative and quantitative understandings regarding value and impact of arts and cultural engagement. The language of the 4 themes is deliberately open and flexible so that communities can consider differences in geography, infrastructure, engagement and equity of access to arts and culture. What this research demonstrates is that targeted and intentional arts and cultural activities and programs are profound drivers of social connection, social cohesion and community wellbeing. These are not unintended or incidental outcomes. Rather, communities tell us they are based on existing evidence around the connection between arts and health in the sense of the individual wellbeing outcomes from participating in arts, culture and creativity. I don't often amplify the words of a Prime Minister, but I feel that Anthony Albanese's sentiment on this slide at the launch of the National Cultural Policy here in Australia captures what many of us in the room feel about what we do in terms of arts, culture and creativity. The Prime Minister said, "The arts cannot simply be left to those who can afford to do it. It is an important part of our economy and we need to recognise that. But it's important to lift up ourselves above the usual economic debate. It is about our soul. It is about our identity." Thank you.
Wow. Professor Sandra in the house. Thank you. Whoop, whoop. And yeah, hope everyone online is feeling good. Just reminding you, we've got Ryan there with you in place, ready to note any questions and comments that you'd like to make when we get to question and discussion time for the session today. So the treats continue, everyone. We've next got Brydie Bartleet and Flora Wong representing an absolutely epic team from the Creative Change Project. So they'll be representing their colleagues Pearly Black, Emma Heard, Matt Sue and Joel Spence, who I've heard is in Babyland at the moment. So congratulations, Joel and family. But we've got most of the team with us today and they will be available to chime in discussion time. So please join me in welcoming Brydie and Flora.
Thanks so much, Naomi, and thank you, Sandra, as well. It's an enormous honour to be in a session with you. Your work has been so formative for how we understand the benefits and the value of the arts and the impact of the arts in Australia, and particularly in regional Australia, so thank you. We also want to acknowledge and echo the beautiful acknowledgements of country that we've heard in so many creative and different and profound ways over the last 3 days. And from the Creative Change Project, want to pay respect to the Turrbal and the Yagara elders, past, present, emerging, and to extend that respect to all of our First Nations colleagues here in Australia, but of course from across the world who are joining us at SIMM. It's a great pleasure to take off the conference organiser hat, so I'd like to thank the Scientific Committee for accepting our proposal. You know, you never quite know how these things are going to go. It's an honour to be able to share a little bit about our Creative Change project, and I thank Flora here, who was giving such an amazing performance in the foyer a minute ago and has also changed hats to be presenting here. Look, the Creative Change project is a national project that is seeking to understand a really complex topic area, and that is the role that community music can play in addressing entrenched social inequity in Australia, or framed in a more strengths-based way, the role that music can play in creating more equitable societies. It's funded by an Australian Research Council Future Fellowship. And these future fellowships are given to a single individual, you know, a superstar researcher, to go and do a huge big project for 4 years. With a topic like this, it was really clear to me right from the outset, even though I have some degree of lived experience relating to this topic, my family have daily lived experience relating to other aspects of the topic, this was not something that could possibly be answered by one person alone. And so I feel very blessed that we have a big team here who come to this project with incredible superpowers, creative strengths, lived experience of different aspects of the topic to come and try and answer this really complex question. And so I've been thinking a lot in the last few days about how we go about doing SIMM work, and I keep coming back to the idea that it has to be a collective effort. It can't possibly be something undertaken by an individual through one lived experience. So to honour that, we're going to play a little video that brings to life the team, their stories, some of the communities that they've been working with in partnership to try and understand the role that community music can play in addressing entrenched social inequity. So we're going to go to the video. There we are, looking very nice.
Hi, my name is Brydie Bartleet and I'm the ARC Future Fellow on the Creative Change project. This is a large national study that's
It is loading, just bear with us for a minute. Those are not words you'd like to hear. It has frozen again. So that's a little moment where we need to just do a bit of a switch of computers. We have a frozen computer, but we know how to get things working. So what I might do now is we were going to play the video and have a few provocations and things, but we also have a second part, and this is me just thinking on my toes. Matt, if we can switch to the next one, would that be okay? The next presentation is Emma, and Emma's actually going to do a second part to our presentation today, and it's also based on the Creative Change project. But instead of working on answering this question from within communities, we've been looking at this through the literature, and we did a large-scale systematic literature review, and Emma's going to present on that. And we might switch to that, and then we'll come back to the video because we can think on our feet. Okay.
Thank you, everyone. And it's lovely to see everyone again and to be here again, and it actually makes sense for us to this presentation to go first. This was some of the sort of significant foundational work that we did really at the beginning of the project to try to understand the current academic landscape, exploring community music and the arts and social equity. So, as Brydie mentioned, I'm going to run through a sort of a systematic style review that has informed our thinking around the design of some of the case studies that you'll hear about in a moment, as well as how we shape our findings, and will hopefully be really useful to everyone as we start to think about how we understand social equity related outcomes of community music. Addressing social and health inequity is one of the United Nations Sustainability Development Goals and an urgent concern facing communities across the globe. Community music groups, arts organisations, local governments, social enterprises the world over are increasingly initiating community music programs targeting a range of social inequities, from gender-based violence to entrenched racism, from health inequity to poverty. But the current evidence base exploring the ways in which community music could have an impact on these complex social issues is disparate and commonly considers outcomes in terms of behaviours or symptoms rather than as their potential to tackle entrenched systemic inequity. So to help us, I guess, understand this gap and make a small contribution to it, we conducted a critical interpretive synthesis. So a critical interpretive synthesis is designed to support the integration of both qualitative and quantitative data for the purposes of understanding a phenomenon. While it's systematic in its approach, it differs from other systematic reviews that aim to capture all evidence about sort of a narrow intervention type addressing a particular concern. Critical interpretive synthesis, I don't know how to say that in the multiple, are generally iterative in the selection process, and the researcher interpretation is integral across all the phases. So I've put together a quick, a bit of a flow chart so you can see the process. Critical interpretive synthesis was a really important approach for this type of review because equity is described in so many different ways and using so many different terms across the literature, so it didn't make sense to do a sort of really rigid systematic review. In the same way, outcomes are not always described specifically using the words social equity, but are often addressing factors related to social equity, and we've just heard some great examples of that over the last few days. Through this approach to analysis, we identified 74 articles with the potential for community music programs to support equity-related practice in 3 key ways. So the first way was by supporting the sort of immediate well-being of individuals experiencing disadvantage. Next, by supporting individual people to develop skills and knowledge to create positive change within their communities. And then finally, by challenging the social and structural foundations of inequity. So I'll start to unpack each of those a little bit more. So most of the studies that we identified reported positive outcomes for individual participants experiencing discrimination or marginalisation, and this referred to things like well-being, social connection, identity formation, affirmation, confidence, and empowerment. To give an example, a participant of a study by Van Ruin and Dos Santos said about their participation in a choir, and this participant was part of a choir that was in a children's home with young people who had experienced trauma. And I quote, "People have told me that I will get nowhere in life because of this or because of that. But now I can look at them and I can say, look what I did. I can make the best of my future if I go on and do my best." So the next theme really related to outcomes that were focused still on the individual people participating, but rather than only looking at personal development, they were about empowering individual participants with skills, knowledge, and understandings to make positive changes with the potential for shifting inequity within their communities. And so this included things like bringing diverse groups of people together, developing empathy and tolerance and pro-social behaviours and attitudes, and also critical reflection. So to give an example, in an ethnographic study of a program that was conducted with school students in Canada, author Manti found that the graduates I spoke to discovered things about themselves through the power of music, and also wanted to use the power of music to try to make a better world. And the final theme is about outcomes that suggest community music programs may have the potential to affect change beyond the individual people participating and to challenge some of the harmful social norms, act as advocacy tools, and maybe also as by promoting sort of positive interactions or new visions of equitable societies. And it was really lovely hearing Christy's talk this morning that I think had some real resonance with this theme. So to give an example of this one, a qualitative study that included elements of autoethnography described a community music program that began as sort of informal music making in a refugee setting and actually developed into a touring band. And the authors write, knowledge of Bosnian musical traditions were used to contradict conservative ideologies. Women contributed not only to defending gender equality, but also to improving their own life and the lives of their families and friends, and enabled the creation of less stereotypical images. So that just gives you a little bit of a taste of some of the things that came out through our literature review. I thought I would just end with a bit of food for thought and some things we might be able to chat through during the discussion. So first, we need to consider, and this really relates to some of the things that Sandra was saying as well, how best to track the impact of relatively small programs on societal change. Any impact that community music programs may have is not achieved in isolation from a wide range of contextual factors affecting participants' lives and the communities within which programs are conducted. They're just a piece of a really complex puzzle. We know that traditional approaches to evaluation and things like RTCs or sort of strict research approaches are usually not practical, often not meaningful, and won't capture the depth or sort of intangible benefits of community music practice. So how might we approach things differently? The review also highlighted for us the myriad of ways that equity-related concepts are actually talked about. And so this came through in the literature with terms like flourishing, human rights, empathy, equality, discrimination, well-being, activism, social change, social impact, and actually many, many more. So do we need to think about developing a shared language that might help us bring together some interdisciplinary knowledge and research? And finally, are there critical social theories from disciplines within and also beyond music that might help us better understand how community music practice might translate to societal change? So I'll leave it there, and fingers crossed our video is now working, but I look forward to unpacking all of that a little bit more with you at the end.
Thanks so much, Em. And so we've been doing literature reviews, we're doing a major national mapping exercise and working in depth with communities on case studies, and hopefully the video will now work for you to be able to see that work in action.
creating more equitable societies. We're working on 4 in-depth case studies with arts organisations and social sector providers to try and understand how the individual, communal and social benefits of music making can help bring about much more socially just and equitable communities here in Australia.
I'm Flora Wong, a PhD candidate as part of the Creative Change Project. My case study examines the role of community music in the towns of Cunnamulla and Charleville in regional Australia and investigates how music tourism events like QMF's Queensland Music Trails interact with more locally developed activities. By taking an active participant approach to my research and embedding myself as a musician in residence in each town, I've been able to form a deeper understanding of each place and its community. Emerging themes from the data I've gathered include musicking as a form of placemaking that can allow individuals to feel a sense of belonging and purpose within their community, events and activities involving music as unique sites for the fostering of interpersonal understanding and social connection, both within a community and between locals and visitors. And lastly, community musicking as a practice that can foster the openness and creativity that is necessary to identify and address issues of social inequity.
Hi, I'm Joel Spence, part of the Creative Change Project team as a PhD candidate, and my case study is following the work of social justice organisation Big Heart, which has been actively collaborating and songwriting with the Irramugadoo community, led by Nullama and Yinjibarndi elders in Western Australia for the past 12 years. From this work, an awareness-raising advocacy concert developed called Songs for Freedom, and over the past 2 years, toured nationally to highlight the disproportionate rates of Aboriginal youth impacted by the juvenile justice system and generate conversation around the age at which individuals can be incarcerated in Australia. The Songs for Freedom concert, community-written songs and overall campaign has addressed major themes from individual and community connection to country, culture, injustices and spiritual connection demonstrated through the songs, all along with the concert's impact itself of creating awareness and a shift in social attitudes whilst challenging power structures and Australian laws that contribute to ongoing oppression for First Peoples of Australia.
Hi there, I'm Pearly Black. I'm a singer, a singing teacher and performance creative, and now a researcher with the Creative Change Project. I've always been obsessed with all things voice and the myriad wondrous capacities for singing to enhance human life. Within the Creative Change Project, I've been working very closely with Play It Forward, the organisation founded by Dr. Jonathan Welsh that is an umbrella support organisation for a vast array of community choirs and singing projects. I've been working in particular in Werribee and in the Latrobe Valley, looking at specific projects there and the way that they interact with their communities and places. Through exploring emerging themes of belonging and connection to community, celebration of diversity and inclusion, and the creative expression of the voice of a community, I'm more and more intrigued by the ways in which singing and singing together can create a well society and a more equitable society.
I'm Emma and I'm leading the West End case study, which is partnering with a social sector organisation to investigate the ecology of community music practice happening in this urban context. Community music in this community supports people traditionally marginalised by society to feel empowered and to be able to be themselves outside of the musical context. And this may have ripple effects for the community and for broader society in relation to addressing discrimination and oppression. Community music initiatives in West End are valued by participants and facilitators as moments to engage with each other in ways that challenge current power structures and political orders. And finally, music in West End creates rare opportunities for people of different social statuses and walks of life to be together and to bond. And in an area like this one, experiencing rapid gentrification and growing inequality, this is really important for community cohesion and for robust dialogue about what we value and who we want to be.
Hi, I'm Matt Xu. We're now working on a collective analysis across all our case studies, working in depth with our partners to create a range of outputs that will be useful for community and policy. We're also working on a national map of community music initiatives. With this evidence base, we hope to inform a creative turn in the development of policies and approaches aimed at addressing social inequities across Australian communities.
And thank you so much to Matt for putting that impressive video together. So with all our fieldwork done and the data that we've co-created with the different communities that we're working with in these case studies currently being sorted, as a team, we're working through the complex questions that arise, and we'd like to share some of those with you today to open them up for discussion. And the first of this is what happens when you embed creativity and musicking throughout the research process, all stages of research, not just as the subject and not just as a creative output, like a communicative tool, but throughout. Yeah, and you can see that sort of manifesting in the different ways that we've approached our case studies. I'll invite Brydie to share a couple more.
Thanks, Flora. I'm keen to start discussion. Like Flora said, we're keen to put a few provocations or questions that we're grappling with out there, and looking forward to getting your thoughts and also talking about them with Sandra. Another thing that we're grappling with, of course, is something that's come up a few times in this particular symposium, is how we deal with the micro and the macro changes. We're obviously trying to think about the role that music can play in addressing inequitable systems and structures which often sit at macro levels. But so much of what we're seeing, as Em said, reported in the literature, but also happening on the ground, is those really important microsystems. And we're really interested in thinking about the very nested way in which those little micro systems are nested within these macro systems and actually can ripple out and come back. So rather than thinking about them in linear terms, we're trying to think about how they're very organically nested within one another. And I think what's so powerful about music is it has the capacity to kind of activate or allow us to tether ourselves to those micro and macro systems at the same time. So we're grappling with how to actually conceptualize that, and we want to put that out there as something we're struggling with. I know Naomi's talked about that too. And then just the last one relates to the opening comments I made about working collectively. And it's how we can co-design our approaches to SIMM research, co-create data with communities, co-analyse data, and collaboratively share research insights with community members in ways that follow their lead, that honour their wisdom, but don't place unnecessary burdens on them in terms of meeting the needs of funding bodies like the one we're working with here. And so that kind of reciprocal, collaborative, way of working in the SIM space has been another theme that we wanted to throw out there, and would love to also bring Sandra into the mix and Naomi into the mix with discussing that. So thank you for your patience with the technology, which is getting tired, day 3. It's managed 42 different presentations and videos and slides, so I think it's getting ready. So we're looking forward to opening up the conversation now. Thanks, Naomi.
Absolutely fabulous, and kudos to the team for managing in difficult circumstances with technology. We all know how that feels. So yeah, invite all the team members down to join the panel. And yep. Okay, I was just waiting to see biggest mob down here for this panel.
So yeah, I've got questions percolating in my mind for this panel, but one thing I want to note is I loved the images that you all shared, the photos across all of the places that you're working and the people and the people's faces. It really spoke a lot to the way you've all been working, and you know what you're actually talking about and what you're trying to research and record and model and analyse. But I want to actually give everyone in the room and everyone online the chance to ask a question or make a comment, but I've got my ones lined up in my mind if needed. Okay. Okay, we'll go to Ryan online.
Yeah. Jane, do you want to ask your question? Or would you prefer I read it out? Okay. So Jane York asks, I would love to hear about if the co-design process has been successfully fed back to funding bodies to move the funding goalposts in response to communities. Yeah.
Mine finished, yeah. So we completed our project, let's say May, when the report was launched. We've been very fortunate that two of our partners on the project, so it's an ARC linkage project, and for those that don't know what a linkage project is, you're required by the rules of funding to bring organisations to partner with you, which can be cash partnering or in kind or a combination of both. So we strategically, at the very beginning of this project, sought two of the largest politically active organisations in terms of regional Australia to come on board. So one was the Regional Australia Institute, which has a home in Canberra, and then we looked for one in central Western Queensland in Inangai country, which was the Regional Remote Area Planning and Development Board, which was a collaboration of 11 councils. And then there was a similar organisation in La Truita in northwestern Tasmania. So one of the first things we did was make sure that the research was situated within a political sphere so that those people were charged with the responsibility of taking the report and the research that was iterative over 3 years back to the political voices that they had connections to. We didn't have them. An example of that is the Regional Australia Institute, for example, now has a KPI that's been endorsed by federal government about looking for, the word they use is thrivability, related to the inclusion of arts, culture and creativity in regional remote communities in Australia. So our report created that change. So Regional Australia Institute are now charged with collecting data on that, where previously they were only collecting data on sport and rec. So that's an immediate change.
Thank you for that question, and wow, thrivability. Awesome. Okay. Up here with Gillian.
Thank you. Thank you all for such a great session. I'm interested in the language and the names we call things. So it's a question that started with your presentation, Sandra, but others might like to also contribute. I mean, you talked about a creative placemaking approach. So I first wondered, how is that different to what we've been calling community arts and community cultural development? And thinking back to Gay Hawkins' work, where she also talks about, you know, the change in language around terms like multi-arts before community arts or before community cultural development. So just, I'm curious, is it a change in practices that the different words signify, or is it something in the wider policy landscape that makes certain words really key to include, or that there's a shift in how the people receiving these names, these labels, respond to them when they're framed in particular ways?
Do you want to talk about the placemaking review? We like to share.
Yeah. This is a great question, and is that on? Yeah. This is something that came up. We did another literature review looking at place-based arts, and I sort of got steered to creative placemaking, which I learnt was a very particular thing that kind of came out of the States and became a bigger thing here in Australia, but is really linked to kind of urban development and has some positive, but it's also a bit of a challenging concept. And I think, I mean, I'm not an expert on it, you might know more, but there might be sort of links to sort of some art washing and some of those types of concepts. And so then in our literature review, we sort of then talked about place-based arts to avoid creative placemaking, even though there was like lots of crossovers, but we sort of had in our mind that creative placemaking meant a very particular thing to a particular group, yeah.
And what I might just add to what Em said as well is that place-based language we were using was also to be able to speak to the social sector. So our project is really trying to look at ways in which the arts sector doesn't just talk to itself and have a nice conversation, but actually connects with other sectors where we know a lot of these systemic issues need addressing as well. And so that place-based language is very big in the social sector and actually quite problematic as well, we've discovered. We've actually got a lot to problematise in how they've positioned it, but we also deliberately use that language to try and be able to speak to them, and interestingly they've responded. And we did that paper with Jeff Woolcock, who's very well established in the social sector, to specifically, like Teoti said, work strategically.
And just to throw the creative placemaking where your question kind of began, again, it's a strategic choice of words because it speaks to the political sector. So the political sector, when they use those words, that means cultural tourism, that means economic impact, that means jobs and employment, that means tourism. And we wanted to make sure that the art, culture and creativity that we were capturing in central Western Queensland and northwest Tasmania showed that with increased funding, you were able to maximise your dollar. So that communities were then able to argue back to funders and say, look what we did here, give us more and we can do more of it.
Really interesting conversations coming out here, and I'm thinking too about earlier in the day and on the previous 2 days about creative placemaking that happens below the bitumen and the cement, and I'm looking at two people up there, Sandy Sir and Vanessa Tomlinson, thinking about your work as well in deep ecology and country, and Sandy's discussion this morning about just the water, you know, and the environment, natural environment. We've got time for maybe one more question or comment up here with Tom.
Thanks everyone for the presentations, really interesting work. I'm interested in your thoughts on, I guess, the sharing back to community. I can see that audience and who you're targeting in terms of how you distribute the information you've shared back, like government has come through, business has come through, and obviously that does have an impact on the community with the economic benefits of having more access to funding. But what space do you believe there are for, I guess, alternative forms of sharing back that information beyond reports and beyond words?
I can give a very specific example for my case study working in Cunnamulla and Charleville in Western Queensland. In my specific case, I'm going to be, funnily enough, leading on creative work, creating an audio work that weaves together stories through interview fragments, field recordings recorded in place, and music making into a sort of audio work, call it a podcast, I'm not sure about terminology yet, that can be shared both within communities to sort of, you know, give them something to stimulate discussion and share and feel that they have. But also, because my research partner is QMF and their project is explicitly a cultural tourism project, be made available to tourists to, for example, listen to while they're on the drive out to, you know, wherever location they're going to. So that's one of the ways that I think leaning on our creative practices as researchers can really provide ways of engaging and feeding back to communities that is more meaningful than, yes, providing a report for local council, which I'll also do, but yeah. Do you want to chip in?
I'm not sure if I heard all the words that you said in your question, but I'll just say what popped up for me anyway. And thinking beyond the reports and the money and the funding and the this and the that, what has emerged for me with the case study is, well, A, it's relational in such a deep way. Jonathan Welsh, who runs Play It Forward, just goes, right, you're part of the family now. And that's kind of interesting. And so, you know, there will be there's some reports that I can give back to them from what I've seen so far, and they'll be able to use that to develop their work further in specific ways. But I think something that's really struck me is that we have this capacity to give them a very specific mirror about what they're doing. And, you know, we're not doing a evaluation of their organisation as a whole or anything like that. I'm working with some very specific facets of their organisation, and every conversation that I have with the organisers and the facilitators, they are getting some new insights into what they're doing. And me personally, I've been finding that a really valuable thing to be able to put back. Because to me I'm the opposite of a funding chaser. I'm really bad at it. But it's about what it's doing for the people in the place that are doing the stuff. And that's been a very rewarding personal interaction for me, to be able to just give them a couple of, specific, deep, because I appreciate so much what they're doing, there's a special quality to the kind of mirror that I can give back to them. I don't know if that helps at all.
Yeah, it's a great question. Thank you very much. I think this topic of the benefits of music has been kind of spoken about generally over the past couple of decades in this very vague way. Like, oh, music's great for some reason. It makes people happy or something. And what this project really wants to do is kind of take that concept seriously and kind of quantify it and put it on the table for, decision makers to take seriously. But in order to do that, you want to talk to and convince people at large. So in terms of communicating the ideas and the outputs of this research, the idea is to talk to everyone, to talk to 4ZZZ, to talk to people at festivals, music enjoyers in general, and then also, funders, government bodies, decision-making people. And I think an important way to do that is just to use plain language. Ironically, entertainment is one of the best ways to, best vehicles for important messages. And we're a research project investigating entertainment, but not just entertainment, like community-made entertainment. So it's kind of an Ouroboros in a way. But yes, my answer to that question is let's talk to everyone and let's use plain, accessible language.
Great.
Can I add very quickly? I think the important thing is to ask the community how they want it communicated. So you heard me in the presentation say the research should be understood by the community first before you send it out to the funders. So our project asks communities, if you wanted to learn about this project and wanted to share it with others, how would you do that? So we created 4 digital stories. We sent out quarterly newsletters, all of those sort of things, the way that community wanted to share, not how a researcher might traditionally do that.
Thank you so much to this wonder panel. Can everyone online and in person please give them a huge round of applause?